Imperial Grand Admiral, Chiss warrior, bluest man in the galaxy. Thrawn is known as many things. Here's the question though, who is he really? Although Thrawn was the main antagonist of Star Wars Rebels for 2 of its 4 seasons, precious little was revealed in the show about his origins. However, the Star Wars Thrawn novels plug the gap nicely, revealing much about Thrawn's people, the Chiss. The Chiss are a race living in the unknown regions, an area made remote by cosmic obstacles such as black holes, keeping them largely hidden from outsiders. However, this isolation acts as a double-edged sword, as the people of the unknown regions lack access to technologies that might have allowed them to traverse the dangers of their region of space. Fortunately for the Chiss, some of their young hold a strong connection to the Force, giving them the ability to chart safe courses through the unknown regions. However, the Chiss rarely, if ever, venture out of their home area. This is because they are governed by the ruling body known as the Chiss Ascendancy, which enacts policies of secrecy to prevent the species' discovery. Though Thrawn's birth name was Kivura Nuru, his name changed to Mithra Nuru Odo as a sign of respect during his successful military career. The name Thrawn comes from this, a shorthand name that combines his new family name with his given name. The Chiss were not alone in the unknown regions, however. Their biggest threat is an alien race called the Grysk. Known for their warlike nature and mind control abilities, the Grysk are ruled by a hegemony very similar to the Galactic Empire in makeup, with the biggest similarity between the two governments being a desire to expand their influence at any cost. In studying the Grysk and their tactics, Thrawn inadvertently made himself an invaluable asset for Palpatine's empire. But the battle against the Grysk wasn't without its own complications. While the Empire ruled the galaxy for a relatively brief period of time, the Grysk were established early enough that they were able to monitor the Clone Wars, indicating their ambitions had been planned out for some time. But while the Grysk certainly had designs to expand their empire, they had to go through the Chiss to realize their goals. The Chiss Ascendancy realized this and sought allies to fight the Grysk, a task eventually given to Captain Thrawn. Thrawn's loyalty to the Chiss stands above all else. So how and why did he come to serve the Empire? The why is surprisingly simple. The Chiss Ascendancy needed to determine whether the Empire could help them defeat the Grysk Hegemony. So they ordered Thrawn to join the Imperial military. They wanted him to either convince the Empire to stand with the Chiss against the Grysk, or manipulate events such that the Grysk would attack the Empire first, giving the Chiss more time to prepare. The how is a bit more complicated. To help convince the Empire he has nowhere else to go, Thrawn fakes his exile from the Chiss. Then he chooses a world he knows the Empire will eventually explore, and waits. Once the Empire comes to the planet, he slowly and methodically picks off their scouting party, eventually forcing their retreat. Thrawn takes this opportunity to sneak aboard an Imperial ship and allow himself to be captured. Once on board, he tells his story to the ranking officers. Impressed with his tactical skills, they bring him before Emperor Palpatine. Thrawn gains favor with the Emperor on the basis of his history with Anakin Skywalker, whom he had met during the Clone Wars. Although Thrawn doesn't receive any guarantees, Palpatine does agree to consider helping the Chiss if Thrawn serves the Empire faithfully. Although Thrawn ultimately swears allegiance to the Empire and Palpatine, the effort he makes to gain the Emperor's trust proves that his loyalty to the Chiss remained undimmed. While Thrawn holds up his end of the deal to serve the Empire faithfully, his methods put him at odds with some high-ranking Imperial officials. In order to protect himself from the threat of a court-martial, he attends several parties held by powerful members of the Empire. At one such party, Thrawn comes into contact with Arinda Pryce, an ambitious government employee. Although nothing significant occurred in their first meeting, their connection would prove to be mutually beneficial. When Pryce is blackmailed by a rival, Thrawn gives her valuable advice to turn the tables. This advice allows her to thwart her blackmailer and become governor of the Lothal sector. Sometime later, Pryce and Thrawn work together on a military campaign to crush a small group of rebels on the planet Bataan. Pryce is responsible for a large number of civilian casualties during the uprising, which outrages Thrawn. He initially plans on reporting Pryce's misdeeds to the Imperial Security Bureau, but is convinced otherwise when Pryce offers to get Thrawn promoted to Grand Admiral, a ranking Thrawn understandably covets, as it would allow him to better proceed with his primary mission for the Chiss. However, Pryce's offer comes with a catch. She will only secure his promotion if Thrawn brought his fleet to the Lothal system to deal with the rebel cell known as Phoenix Squadron. Thrawn begins his war against Phoenix Squadron almost immediately after receiving his promotion to Grand Admiral, although he finds an opportunity to destroy the rebel ship Ghost during a raid at Reclam Station. Thrawn allows the ship to go free in order to reel in a much larger prize, the location of Phoenix Squadron's hidden base. In order to better understand how the rebels operated, Thrawn spends much of his time analyzing their past and their strategies. Thrawn's almost religious study of all things Phoenix Squadron pays big dividends when he recognizes some distinctive artwork on the helmet of a supposed bounty hunter captured by Imperial agent Kallus. After deducing the bounty hunter is in fact Ezra Bridger, Thrawn realizes Kallus was a double agent. He allows him to continue operating as one until he makes his next transmission. Thrawn then tracks the transmission to the planet of Adalon and launches an all-out assault, defeating and scattering the rebels. His efforts to capture them are thwarted, however, by a creature known as the Bendu. After being shot down, Thrawn's defeat is foretold by the Bendu.
I see your defeat, like many arms surrounding you in a cold embrace.
Although Thrawn is victorious over Phoenix Squadron in the short term, the Bendu's words eventually come back to haunt him. After defeating the rebels on Adalon, Thrawn is ordered by Palpatine to accompany Darth Vader to investigate a disturbance in the Force on Batuu, the same planet on which Thrawn and Skywalker had first met. The two locate and capture a band of mysterious aliens who turn out to be Grysk agents. Thrawn and Vader lead an assault on the Grysk base, and, after securing victory, locate the source of the disturbance Palpatine had felt: Force-sensitive Chiss children, whom the Grysk had captured in order to make them serve as navigators. Although Vader wants the children eliminated, Thrawn assures him that the Force-sensitive Chiss would pose no threat, since their connection to the Force grows weaker when they reach adulthood. After rooting out the remaining Grysk and rescuing more Chiss children, Thrawn returns them to the Ascendancy. However, he also learns that the Chiss are heading toward a civil war, with the Grysk backing one of the Chiss factions. Thrawn then reasons that since the Grysk were attempting to capture navigators, it was likely that they were preparing to eliminate the Chiss so they could wage war on the Empire. While Thrawn continues to serve the Empire in the aftermath of this incident, these latest discoveries only harden Thrawn's dedication to the Chiss cause. In order to curry favor with Palpatine and convince him to help the Chiss against the Grysk, Thrawn decides to develop a weapon that could ensure the Empire's stability for years to come. He chooses to improve the standard TIE fighter by giving it more firepower, a hyperdrive, and a deflector shield. The Rebel Alliance sees this new TIE fighter, dubbed the TIE Defender, as a grave threat, since none of their X-Wing craft have the firepower to deal with its enhanced capabilities. As a result, the Rebels authorize a raid on Lothal, where the nuts and bolts of the project are located. The attack is an abject failure, however, with nearly every Rebel pilot killed and their leader, Hera Syndulla, captured. With his factory safe, Thrawn is informed of a new threat to his TIE Defender project, Project Stardust, otherwise known as the Death Star.
If construction of the Defender is to continue, you must make your case directly to the Emperor himself.
Concerned about the Empire's dedication to this hugely expensive project, Thrawn decides to meet with Palpatine personally on Coruscant. Unfortunately, Thrawn's journey to meet with Palpatine proves to be the end of his project, as Governor Pryce blows up all of the fuel for the TIE Defenders in a successful attempt to kill the Jedi Kanan Jarrus. The end of the TIE Defender project holds major implications for the galaxy, as it spurs Palpatine to throw his support behind Project Stardust. It is also a massive blow for Thrawn, as his avenue of gaining favor with the Emperor is closed off. Following the failure of the TIE Defender project, Thrawn is ordered by the Emperor to crush the rebellion on Lothal and capture the young Jedi Ezra Bridger. Thrawn, eager to regain favor with the Emperor to help save his people, brings the might of the 7th Fleet to bear, threatening to blow up the capital city unless the Jedi surrenders. After ensuring Ezra is in the hands of the Emperor, Thrawn returns to the bridge of his capital ship, the Chimera, and orders the fleet to bombard the planet. The shelling of the capital does nothing, however, as the rebels on the ground manage to raise a planetary defense shield in time. Although Thrawn sends his bodyguard Rook to shut down the planetary shield, the rebels manage to fight off the Imperial forces and ensure the shield's functionality. Upon hearing of Rook's death, Ezra enters the bridge and demands Thrawn's surrender. Although Thrawn was still planning on continuing the fight, he is forestalled by the arrival of Purrgil. large space whales that are capable of light speed, the Purrgil completely decimate the entirety of Thrawn's fleet, with one smashing into the bridge of the Chimera and wrapping its tendrils around Thrawn, fulfilling the Bendu's vision of the Grand Admiral's defeat. The Purrgil then jump to lightspeed, flinging both Ezra and Thrawn to an unknown destination in space, and completely destroying any hope Thrawn had of using the Empire to save his people.
Was that the plan?
In 1991, author Timothy Zahn wrote Heir to the Empire. This novel, which was later adapted into a comic series, chronicled the adventures of Luke Skywalker, Leia Organa, Han Solo, and their merry band of rebels following the events of Return of the Jedi. Set approximately 5 years later, Grand Admiral Thrawn is introduced as the next in line to restart the Galactic Empire and crush the New Republic. The story continues with the novels Dark Force Rising and The Last Command, in which Thrawn's plans are thwarted by Luke and his allies. A few years later, the author wrote 2 more novels to follow up his trilogy. This is known as the Hand of Thrawn duology, and that was only the beginning. The Grand Admiral would return to play the role of recurring antagonist throughout the extended universe. For decades, the original Thrawn trilogy served as the launching point for the greater Star Wars expanded universe. But when Disney purchased Lucasfilm in 2012, everything changed. Thrawn, like many other characters and stories, was written out of continuity by the House of Mouse, with Zahn's acclaimed trilogy being rebranded under the Legends banner. When Thrawn was eventually reintroduced into the continuity, Lucasfilm made a few significant changes to the character. For starters, unlike in the Heir to the Empire storyline, the Disney versions of Thrawn and Luke never encounter one another. Instead, Ahsoka Tano and Ezra Bridger serve as Thrawn's main adversaries, with Luke off elsewhere, re-establishing the fallen Jedi Order. Selling over 15 million copies, Zahn's trilogy was so successful that his work on Heir to the Empire is credited by some with saving the Star Wars franchise at a time when new adventures were scarce. Following the original theatrical release of Return of the Jedi, and a few other 80s projects that we really don't need to talk about, Star Wars content had stalled by the early 90s. George Lucas had yet to develop the prequel trilogy, so Zahn's work single-handedly carried the franchise, opening the door for more expanded universe stories. Though Lucas didn't consider them canon, he nevertheless took plot beats, characters, and locations from the EU and added them to his new films. No doubt, Thrawn's popularity among Star Wars fans was a reason why Zahn's trilogy was so successful. For many years, the Heir to the Empire trilogy was the closest thing to a direct Star Wars sequel trilogy that fans seemed likely to witness, as Lucas largely moved on from the franchise from the mid-80s to the turn of the century. Thrawn's reappearances in various novels, games, and comics were quite welcome among fans before Disney swooped in and took over. It also explains why the character survived the House of Mouse's purge of the greater extended universe. He was too important to fans to be erased entirely. Perhaps understandably, some fans still hold out hope that other characters from this era could one day return as well.
No one's ever really gone.
Grand Admiral Thrawn had the pleasure of meeting both Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader during very different phases of the former Jedi's life. The 2018 novel Thrawn Alliances revolves around the brief partnership between the Sith Lord and the Warlord as they work together to investigate the Force disturbance on Batuu. But Alliances doesn't just cover this partnership between Thrawn and Vader. It also flashes back to the Clone Wars, when Thrawn and the young Skywalker worked together to save Padme Amidala. During this time, Thrawn deduces that Anakin is a Jedi. Although Anakin believes his role as a Jedi was obvious given the color of his lightsaber, Thrawn explains his hesitation. He tells Anakin, "Our myths of the Republic speak of 2 groups of beings with such powers, the Jedi and the Sith. But the Sith are reputed to be clever and capable warriors." As it turns out, Anakin's numerous mistakes in combat allowed Thrawn to correctly identify him as a Jedi. Years later, Emperor Palpatine tells Thrawn of Skywalker's death following the Clone Wars. Despite this lie, the Chiss double agent quickly deduces that Lord Vader and the former General Skywalker are one and the same. As one of the only people in the galaxy to uncover this safeguarded information, Thrawn keeps it to himself. Smart move, Thrawn. Since the Chiss are so far removed from the known galaxy, they have little to no knowledge of society in the Republic. Nevertheless, the Force still extends into the unknown regions, even if the people who reside there don't actually know what it is. For the Chiss people, Force-sensitive children may not have the same giftings as other races do, but they still retain a premonition ability, which they call Third Sight. Because of their ability to peer into the future, children with third sight are conscripted to become spacefaring navigators, since the Chiss don't use traditional technological navigation. Thrawn's older sister, Kivurik Ardok, otherwise known as Vurika, was one of these Force-sensitive children and was taken when Thrawn was just a boy. As an adult, like many Chiss children with third sight, Vurika lost her precognitive abilities and instead worked as an instructor for future navigators. Despite being siblings, when confronted by the chance to finally meet her long-lost brother, Vurika, now known as Burika after her marriage, weeps, believing that there is no point since her memories of Thrawn have long faded. Tragically, despite having once believed that one day he might use his resources to find her, Thrawn never reunites with his sister. Eventually, he comes to respect her wishes for anonymity and moves on. The events of the Star Wars Rebels finale, in which Ezra Bridger and Thrawn are thrown into the unknown, are set in the same year as the original Star Wars film.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
In that movie, the Empire loses Grand Moff Tarkin and the first Death Star at the hands of Luke Skywalker and the Rebel Alliance. After these two enormous defeats, the Emperor tasks Darth Vader with personally overseeing the destruction of the rebels. In Star Wars No. 8, which is set after Vader's showdown with Luke on Cloud City, Palpatine claims that Thrawn or Tarkin would have been perfect for this job, and laments that both are gone. Though the task delays the Sith Lord's search for his long-lost son, Vader deems it necessary for the health of the Empire. In Thrawn's absence, Darth Vader continues to hunt down the rebels. During the so-called War of the Bounty Hunters, he comes close to capturing Han Solo and a number of his allies, but ultimately fails. Had Thrawn still been around, however, these events might not have gone as well for Luke and his friends, and it's entirely possible that Luke may have been captured prior to his surrender in Return of the Jedi. Likewise, Vader's position overseeing construction of the second Death Star may have been held by someone else had Thrawn or Tarkin survived, meaning his turn back to the light may never have occurred. Although Thrawn is often seen as a ruthless leader willing to do whatever it takes for the sake of his ambitions, this couldn't be further from the truth. From his youth into his Imperial career, Thrawn always believes that every life holds some sort of value. Though he has no problem eliminating his enemies, he sees the deaths of innocent civilians as senseless and unnecessary. In the novel Thrawn Ascendancy, Greater Good, he says, "All lives are important, and I resist the thought of standing by and watching 200 possibly needless deaths." This was especially true of Thrawn when he served in the Chiss military, but it generally carries over to his time with the Empire as well. Generally speaking, Thrawn also shows deep respect for his enemies, but this only goes so far. In Star Wars Rebels, Thrawn unleashes his full fury on the Lothal system near the end of his time there. After his increasingly futile attempts to put the insurgency down, he fires on the people of Capital City until Ezra Bridger surrenders himself to the Empire. It's worth noting that these actions come about due to intense pressure from Emperor Palpatine, who hopes to turn Ezra to the dark side. But Thrawn is certainly still the man in charge during the bombardment. Had Thrawn been given more time, however, he may have come up with an alternative solution that didn't threaten the lives of those below. An interesting shade to the Thrawn character is the Grand Admiral's love, or at least appreciation, of traditional art and music. Believing the arts to be a window into the history and culture of different people groups, Thrawn sees it as a valuable tool to be used to better understand his allies and opponents.
My apologies, Captain Slavin. I forgot not everyone is able to appreciate art as I do.
In the Zahn novel Thrawn Ascendancy, Lesser Evil, a younger Thrawn is shown analyzing hundreds of thousands of different pieces of artwork that belong to his adoptive family, many of which were created by anonymous artists. He even manages to connect a series of seemingly unrelated works together based solely on style and technique, eventually discovering the artist's identity. Likewise, in Rebels, Thrawn is shown to have amassed an impressive collection of artwork that all point to the crew of the Ghost, which includes Ezra Bridger, Sabine Wren, and Hera Syndulla. In his time studying their work, he comes to better understand his enemies and uses this knowledge of their goals and ideals to overpower them. Across his various media appearances, this appreciation for the arts has remained a strong, consistent character trait for the Chiss warlord. Though Thrawn isn't much of an artist himself, his knowledge and understanding of technique and structure have proven invaluable to his military campaign. And it's very possible that we'll see more of the Grand Admiral's cultural side in future Star Wars projects. Though there are any number of military leaders who could have been the basis for Grand Admiral Thrawn, Zahn revealed the exact source of his inspiration in a letter written in 2002. He wrote, "Thrawn isn't based on any one historical person in particular, but is more of a composite of the best and brightest military geniuses that have ever lived." On Zahn's list, Hannibal, Alexander the Great, Robert E. Lee, and Erwin Rommel. Zahn continued to explain Thrawn's characterization by emphasizing that he, unlike many real-life military leaders, genuinely cares about those under his command. The lives of his officers matter to him, and he has no desire to see any of them gunned down for no reason. Since Thrawn was supposed to be a different sort of villain than Darth Vader, who ruled his underlings by fear, he was made into a tactical genius, a man who would be so respected by his men that they would follow him anywhere. But Zahn wasn't only inspired by the historical leaders of old to create Thrawn, he was also inspired by popular fictional characters, including a few who wouldn't have been all that fond of the Grand Admiral's allegiances. For example, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's famous detective Sherlock Holmes was a clear template for Thrawn's ability to piece together a mystery.
Elementary, my dear Watson. Purely elementary.
Of course, although Holmes uses his exceptional mind to help others, Thrawn uses it to advance the goals of the Empire, which is a little less noble, to say the least. Despite being the beloved antagonist of the most well-received Star Wars novels, the editors at Marvel Comics reportedly had no initial interest in including the infamous Grand Admiral in their ongoing Star Wars titles. According to former Marvel assistant editor Heather Antos, who took to Twitter to show her support for Thrawn's reintroduction into the franchise, a very important higher-up at Marvel told her, "The blue guy? No one cares about him." Of course, it was only a few years later that Thrawn would get his own comic series in support of his debut on Rebels. Clearly, someone had a change of heart. And ever since his successful return, Thrawn has become a recurring character throughout the greater Star Wars universe. Be it the different Marvel comic books, various Thrawn-themed novels, or his presence in the live-action shows, it's clear that Thrawn is here to stay. And, of course, with the announcement of Dave Filoni's upcoming movie, which is set to round off the stories begun by The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, and Ahsoka, there's also a lot to look forward to as Thrawn expands his grasp over the Star Wars franchise. In addition to the Thrawn trilogy that Timothy Zahn penned in the early 90s, the author found the chance to tackle the character on a number of occasions afterward. Though Zahn wrote various sequel stories featuring Thrawn that took place after The Last Command, he also took on a number of novels set in the Disney continuity. The first of the new Thrawn trilogy was Star Wars Thrawn, which was followed up by Thrawn Alliances and Thrawn Treason. These projects allowed the character's creator to reintroduce him to Star Wars as the protagonist of his own story. And it didn't end there. Though Zahn had reinvented Thrawn, helping transition him from legends into canon, he had more stories to tell concerning the Grand Admiral. In 2020, another Thrawn-based novel, titled Thrawn Ascendancy Chaos Rising, was published by Zahn, this one exploring the character's history with his people, the Chiss, and the rivalry with the Grysk. Known as the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy, Zahn continued Thrawn's pre-Clone Wars story with Greater Good in 2021 and Lesser Evil later that year, rounding out his overhaul of the character's past and forever changing the way fans saw the Chiss legend. Knowing that Zahn is involved in future Thrawn stories should give Star Wars loyalists hope that, however the Grand Admiral is adapted next, his creator won't be far behind.